I'd share with you this morning a story. We've heard the story of Christ's birth, and now just another little different story to reflect on and think about during this holy season. It's a perfect morning, a perfect day to pause and reflect a little. The story of Jesus' birth is pretty extraordinary, isn't it? But it's not Jesus' birth that really got us going. It's really Jesus' life and all the teachings that Jesus taught us about God that causes us to celebrate his birth. It's what was important about Jesus was how he lived and what he taught us. God is still speaking today, maybe not through glowing white angels, but God is still speaking to us in lots of different ways, and I hope that this story will be one of those ways. The story comes from a selection of Advent readings titled, "Let Us All Welcome Him," and it's about a little girl named Marna. In an ordinary home, in an ordinary neighborhood, lived a quiet little girl named Marna. She was quieter than all the other kids on the block, not because she was such a good little girl, as grown-ups like to call quiet little girls, but because she was deaf. When Marna was born, her eyes worked perfect, her fingers worked, her appetite worked, but her ears didn't work well at all. She wasn't able to hear the ordinary things, so Marna grew up hearing things we aren't able to hear. Her mind created for her new sounds for things like running water and sirens, but also her mind gave her sounds for things that we can't hear, like the stars and the sun and trees. Marna's world was full of wondrous sounds, sounds that she couldn't share with others. The people who didn't know her very well felt sorry for her and would say, "Poor Marna, not able to hear the television. And poor Marna, she can't hear her friends." But Marna got along just fine. She had many friends, even though she couldn't talk like they did. She used a sign language that was so graceful, people stopped talking just to watch her hands. One Christmas, Marna's family made some gifts to take to some older people in a nursing home. They made candy, they grew plants, and they sewed pillows. All together, they took them to the grandmas and grandpas who weren't able to do the Christmas kinds of things we do. While the grandmas were exclaiming over the gifts, Marna's eyes wandered to an old man sitting in the corner. Marna's eyes wandered, and she went over. She picked up a box of candy, and she took the box of candy to him. When he saw her coming, he turned his wheelchair to the wall, putting her back towards him. "Don't pay any attention to him, honey," said one of the grandmas. "He's a sour old man who doesn't like people or Christmas." But Marna didn't hear her, so she walked around to the wall and put the box on the man's lap. He let it sit there, and he didn't look up to look at her. She knelt in front of him and in sign language said, "Hi, I'm Marna. What's your name?" He just stared at her, and then Marna realized he couldn't hear or see her very well. She took both his hands in hers and formed the words with his gnarled fingers, "Merry Christmas, I like you." A great smile lighted up the wrinkles in his face, and his worn hands said back to Marna, "Thank you. You have the nicest hands I've ever heard. She grinned and replied, You ought to hear your smile. He looked up then, and there was a little tear in his eye. He signed to her, Will you take me down the hall to listen to the manger? She nodded, and as she wheeled him down the corridor to hear the crib, to listen to the star, and to admire the manger, the grown-ups watched and shook their heads sadly. Poor little girl, poor old man. Imagine not being able to hear at Christmas. Thought-provoking, isn't it? So many of us don't really hear Christmas, do we? Marna and the old man didn't hear the way we hear. No, they heard the glory in the star, and they heard the joy in each other's smile, and they heard the importance of the manger. Marna's story of hearing the unhearable and loving unconditionally reminds us to love without judging, the way that Jesus teaches. Just like there's nothing ordinary about Marna, there's nothing ordinary about Jesus. Jesus' life, his death. And there's nothing ordinary about what Jesus calls us to be and how Jesus calls us to live. Wouldn't it be wonderful if loving one another unconditionally was commonplace and ordinary? Let's each start today, this Christmas morning, a new trend to do our best to live the way that Jesus teaches us to live. And all say, Happy birthday, Jesus. Amen.